The Price of Grace, a cinematic rewrite. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen rain, scattering golden light across the ballroom. Every surface gleamed polished marble floors, glass vases brimming with white roses, and silver cutlery lined with geometric precision. The place reeked of perfection, the kind that cost more than sincerity ever could. I stepped into that grand hall, my heels tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm. Eyes turned. Conversations faltered. My sister, Grace, stood near the altar, glowing in her pearl gown, a picture of elegance and deceit. The last time we had shared a room, our mother's house had been filled with the stench of betrayal, and Grace had been the one holding the match. Now she was marrying Daniel, the man who had once been mine. Our mother's eyes met mine across the crowd, her smile tight, a warning disguised as warmth. Behave. That's what it meant. But I hadn't come to make a scene. I had come to watch the empire Grace built on lies begin to crack beneath its own weight. Michael stood near the back, watching me with quiet concern. He was the only one who'd stayed after everything, after the accusations, the ruined contracts, the whispers that I had sabotaged our family's vineyard. It had taken 2 years to untangle Grace's manipulations, to clear my name, to rebuild what she had burned, and now Moldova Wines was mine, thriving, independent, and finally clean. Grace's voice broke through the silence as she read her vows. She spoke with that same honeyed tone that had fooled everyone for years, each word polished, practiced, perfect. Daniel looked at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the only truth in the world, but when her eyes flicked toward me, a flicker of something darker passed through them. Fear. Guilt. Recognition. After the ceremony, I approached her. She froze, veil trembling slightly as I leaned in close enough for only her to hear. Congratulations, I whispered, my voice steady, smooth. You got what you wanted. For now. Her smile faltered. You shouldn't be here, Amber. I earned my place back in this family long before today, I replied, brushing a stray rose petal from her sleeve. Enjoy the celebration. It won't last long. Because while she'd been busy orchestrating her perfect life, I'd been busy rebuilding mine, and this time, it was unshakable. 3 weeks later, Moldova Wines released a statement. Financial misconduct. Fraudulent investments. The company Grace had started with Daniel was under investigation. Their accounts were frozen, their investors fleeing like startled birds. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had built her success by stealing mine, and now it was collapsing under the same sins. When the headlines hit, I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply poured myself a glass of Cabernet from my vineyard, watched the rain fall outside my window, and let the quiet do the talking. That evening, Michael joined me. He didn't say much, just handed me a letter Grace had sent, unopened. I looked at it for a long moment before sliding it aside. Some roots are poisoned, I thought. Some family ties too tightly wound to ever breathe. Do you ever think about forgiving her? Michael asked softly. I stared into the deep red of the wine, its reflection catching the candlelight. Forgiveness isn't something you give to someone like Grace, I said. It's something you give yourself when you stop needing revenge. Outside, the vineyard stretched for miles, rows upon rows of vines I had planted with my own hands, nurtured with patience and purpose. Maybe Grace had won the first battle, but I had built the legacy. And as the rain turned to mist and the horizon blushed with the color of dawn, I realized something simple, something final. I was free. Some roots we inherit, others we choose. The chandeliers above shimmered like frozen rain, scattering golden light across the ballroom. Every surface gleamed polished marble floors, glass vases brimming with white roses, and silver cutlery lined with geometric precision. The place reeked of perfection, the kind that cost more than sincerity ever could. I stepped into that grand hall, my heels tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm. Eyes turned. Conversations faltered. My sister, Grace, stood near the altar, glowing in her pearl gown, a picture of elegance and deceit. The last time we had shared a room, our mother's house had been filled with the stench of betrayal, and Grace had been the one holding the match. Now she was marrying Daniel, the man who had once been mine. Our mother's eyes met mine across the crowd, her smile tight, a warning disguised as warmth. Behave. That's what it meant. But I hadn't come to make a scene. I had come to watch the empire Grace built on lies begin to crack beneath its own weight. Michael stood near the back, watching me with quiet concern. He was the only one who'd stayed after everything, after the accusations, the ruined contracts, the whispers that I had sabotaged our family's vineyard. It had taken 2 years to untangle Grace's manipulations, to clear my name, to rebuild what she had burned, and now Moldova Wines was mine, thriving, independent, and finally clean. Grace's voice broke through the silence as she read her vows. She spoke with that same honeyed tone that had fooled everyone for years, each word polished, practiced, perfect. Daniel looked at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the only truth in the world, but when her eyes flicked toward me, a flicker of something darker passed through them. Fear. Guilt. Recognition. After the ceremony, I approached her. She froze, veil trembling slightly as I leaned in close enough for only her to hear. Congratulations, I whispered, my voice steady, smooth. You got what you wanted. For now. Her smile faltered. You shouldn't be here, Amber. I earned my place back in this family long before today, I replied, brushing a stray rose petal from her sleeve. Enjoy the celebration. It won't last long. Because while she'd been busy orchestrating her perfect life, I'd been busy rebuilding mine, and this time, it was unshakable. 3 weeks later, Moldova Wines released a statement. Financial misconduct. Fraudulent investments. The company Grace had started with Daniel was under investigation. Their accounts were frozen, their investors fleeing like startled birds. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had built her success by stealing mine, and now it was collapsing under the same sins. When the headlines hit, I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply poured myself a glass of Cabernet from my vineyard, watched the rain fall outside my window, and let the quiet do the talking. That evening, Michael joined me. He didn't say much, just handed me a letter Grace had sent, unopened. I looked at it for a long moment before sliding it aside. Some roots are poisoned, I thought. Some family ties too tightly wound to ever breathe. Do you ever think about forgiving her? Michael asked softly. I stared into the deep red of the wine, its reflection catching the candlelight. Forgiveness isn't something you give to someone like Grace, I said. It's something you give yourself when you stop needing revenge. Outside, the vineyard stretched for miles, rows upon rows of vines I had planted with my own hands, nurtured with patience and purpose. Maybe Grace had won the first battle, but I had built the legacy. And as the rain turned to mist and the horizon blushed with the color of dawn, I realized something simple, something final. I was free. Some roots we inherit, others we choose. 15 years had passed since the vineyard wars ended. The world had moved on, but Moldova had not changed much. Still wrapped in gold sunlight, still humming with the rhythm of harvest and heartache. I was older now, slower, wiser, maybe a little lonelier. My name, Amber Solis, had become something of a legend in the winemaking world. People came from all over to taste my blends, to tour the hills I once fought to save, but when they praised my resilience, they never saw the ghosts walking beside me. Grace wrote to me once every year, always on the first day of spring. Her letters had grown warmer, her words gentler. She spoke of Tuscany, of quiet mornings and dusty roads, of the new vineyard she'd built from nothing. She called it Sorel Sisters. I smiled the first time I read it, though a part of me wondered if the name was meant to heal the past or haunt it. One bright morning, as the vines shimmered with dew, a young woman arrived at my estate. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her hair dark gold like sunlight trapped in amber reminded me of someone I once knew. She introduced herself shyly. I'm Clara. Clara? I repeated, confused. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Grace's daughter. My heart stilled. Grace had never told me she'd had a child. She said I should come find you, Clara continued softly. She said Moldova is as much my story as hers. I gestured for her to follow me through the vineyard. As we walked between the rows, the earth rich and fragrant beneath our boots, I couldn't help but see the past bleeding into the present. The same vines, the same soil, now ready to grow something new. Clara listened intently as I spoke of winemaking, of how the best grapes are born from struggle, from the tension between sunlight and shadow. She smiled. That sounds like my mother. We spent the afternoon in the tasting room. She asked about the old days, about the feud, the scandal, the silence. I told her the truth, but gently. She deserved that much. Before leaving, she handed me an envelope sealed in red wax. She asked me to give you this, she said. When I opened it later that night, the letter smelled faintly of lavender and rain. Grace's scent. Amber, if you're reading this, I hope you met Clara. She's my heart, everything I could never be. My vineyard here is flourishing, but my health is fading. Don't mourn me when I'm gone. Just keep her close. Teach her the honesty of the soil, she'll need it more than I ever did. You were right. Forgiveness isn't something you give, it's something you learn to live. Always, Grace. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Grace passed away that summer. The news came quietly, like the end of a long reign. Clara returned to Moldova, this time not as a guest, but as family. She worked beside me, pruning, fermenting, tasting. She had her mother's hands, steady and delicate, and my stubbornness. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the valley glowed copper, I swore I could feel Grace's presence in the vines, her laughter tangled in the leaves, her regrets fading into the wind. One evening, Clara and I sat beneath the old oak tree at the vineyard's edge, the same place where Grace and I had once fought, cried, and eventually forgiven. Do you ever wish things had been different? Clara asked. I took a deep breath. No, I said finally. Because if they were, we wouldn't be here. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with that same quiet fire her mother once carried. Then maybe that's what legacy really means, not what you leave behind, but who you leave standing. Her words lingered long after the stars came out. I looked at the endless rows of vines, the earth that had carried our sins and our salvation, and smiled. Grace's vineyard thrived in Tuscany. Mine flourished here in Moldova. Two roots, once tangled in rivalry, now stretched across continents, separate, yet forever intertwined. Years later, when Clara took over Moldova, she renamed one of our blends. She called it Sorel Solis. On the label, for the sisters who taught the vines how to forgive, and as I stood in the golden light of harvest, I whispered to the wind, some roots never die. They just grow deeper, across time, through love, into legacy. The year Clara turned 28, the vines at Moldova reached a maturity that mirrored her own. Their roots were deep now, their fruits steady and generous, no longer fragile against the seasons. She had learned to read them the way other people read faces, every curl of leaf, every whisper of wine through the rose. Amber had stepped back from the day-to-day running of the estate, content to wander the hills in the evenings and let the next generation take the reins. She called it listening to the soil grow old with me. But Clara could feel something missing. The work filled her hands, not her heart. It was during the annual wine festival that he arrived, a journalist named Elias Rowan, sent from a European trade magazine to write a feature on the women of Moldova. He was older than Clara by a few years, sun-touched, with the kind of quiet curiosity that made people tell him things they hadn't meant to share. He asked about fermentation cycles, soil pH, the origin of the Moldova blend. She answered, but every conversation drifted toward the past, to Grace and Amber, to the two sisters who had turned betrayal into legacy. You speak of them like they're still here, he said one afternoon, notebook forgotten, on his knee. In a way, they are, she replied. Every vine remembers them. Elias smiled, the kind that looked half sad. And what will the vines remember of you? The question lingered long after he left. Over the following months, he kept returning, first for follow-up interviews, then for harvest, then simply because he wanted to. They walked the fields at dawn, traded stories about failure and faith, about how love could grow in places broken open by time. Amber noticed before Clara did. You've let someone into the vines, she said one evening. Clara flushed. He's just interested in the work. Amber laughed softly. So was your mother once. And so was I. The vines don't care whether you call it work or love. They only ask that you be honest. When winter came, Elias asked her to travel with him to Tuscany. There's a vineyard there you should see, he said. Your mother's. Clara hesitated. She had never been. The thought of standing among Grace's vines felt like opening a letter she'd avoided her whole life. But she went. Sorel lay nestled in a valley of soft green hills, its soil darker, richer than she'd imagined. The workers greeted her as though they already knew her. She spoke of you often, one woman said. Said you were the harvest she never lived to see. Clara knelt and touched the earth. It was warm, forgiving. In that moment she understood what her mother had meant in her last letter, that forgiveness, once rooted, blooms in those who come after. Elias watched her quietly. Maybe this is what the vines will remember of you, he said. That you came back. She smiled through tears. Then let them remember love, not loss. They spent the rest of the winter between Tuscany and Moldova, bridging the two vineyards like twin hearts finally beating in rhythm. When spring returned, Clara bottled her first independent blend, a marriage of grapes from both estates. She named it the Bloom. At the launch, Amber stood beside her, proud eyes shining. To Grace, Amber toasted softly, raising her glass. Clara lifted hers in return. And to what she left behind, hope. The crowd applauded, but Clara only heard the wind outside, rustling through the vines, the same eternal sound that had carried the voices of all who'd come before her. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was standing in anyone's shadow. She was part of the light. Spring had settled fully over the valleys, painting the vineyards in a green so vivid it hurt the eyes. Moldova and Sorel now operated as twin empires, connected not by blood but by the unspoken bond of those who had endured. Clara moved between the estates with confidence, her hands steady, her mind sharp, but her heart had begun to feel a quiet tension she couldn't name. Elias had become her constant companion, not only in life but in the business of wine. He was clever, passionate, always asking questions that dug deeper than the soil, that tested the limits of what she thought she could carry. Yet lately, he had grown restless, distracted, consumed by opportunities that required him to travel further, leaving Clara behind. One evening, as the sunset bled amber into the hills, she walked the rows of Moldova alone. The vines whispered in the wind. Every leaf seemed to know her worries. The harvest was approaching, and yet she felt the same unease. Her mother had once carried the pressure to protect a legacy while navigating a world that demanded perfection. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Elias approached, jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes tired but earnest. "We have an offer," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. "From Bordeaux. They want to partner with us on a new label, global distribution. It's a huge opportunity." Clara studied his face, searching for the catch. "And the price?" she asked. "Control. They want the final say on blends, marketing, even harvest schedules. We'd still oversee day-to-day, but it wouldn't be ours entirely." The vines around them shimmered in the fading light. She ran her fingers along a branch, feeling the tension between growth and restraint. "So, it's either reach more people or keep the soul of what we built intact." Elias hesitated. "I thought you'd be excited." "I am," she admitted, voice low, "but some things aren't meant to be measured in numbers. Some things, like legacy, like love, need freedom to breathe." They stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of ripening grapes and the memory of everything Grace had fought for. Days passed, and the tension deepened. Elias' trips became longer, the emails more frequent, his presence more absent. Clara threw herself into the harvest, guiding workers, testing grapes, tasting blends, the work grounding her, keeping the heart of Moldova beating even as her own heart felt stretched thin. One evening, she found herself in the tasting room, staring at the labels she had crafted for the bloom and the new vintage. Amber entered quietly, setting a hand on her shoulder. "You're carrying too much," Amber said, her voice firm but gentle. "I've seen it in Grace, and I've seen it in you. You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," Clara said softly, though the words felt fragile. "I have Elias." Amber raised an eyebrow. "Yes, but does he carry the same weight you do? Or is he chasing his own horizon?" Clara didn't answer. The breaking point came at a wine auction in New York. Elias had promised to be by her side, but when she arrived, he was already in a private meeting with the Bordeaux investors. By the time he found her, Clara had spoken to dozens of potential partners who admired the integrity of Moldova but questioned the practicalities of keeping two estates entirely independent. "I tried to wait for you," she said quietly when he approached. "But opportunity doesn't wait." Elias took her hands. "I never wanted to leave you behind. You know that." "I know," she whispered, the words tasting bitter and sweet. "But sometimes, love isn't enough when the world asks for more than we can give." They stood together, surrounded by the clatter of glasses, the hum of conversation, the weight of ambition pressing down on them. Clara realized in that moment that love and legacy were not always aligned. That choices had costs, even when hearts were full. Returning to Moldova after the auction, Clara walked the vineyards at night. The stars reflected in her eyes as she traced the rows of grapes. She knew what she had to do. Not to lose Elias, but to find a way to hold on to the essence of what she, Amber, and Grace had built. Uncompromised, she made a plan. Strategic, careful, unflinching. A partnership with Bordeaux could happen, but only on her terms. She would negotiate, bend where she must, but never break the soul of Moldova or Sorel. Elias found her at the edge of the vineyard, staring into the horizon. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That love and legacy," she said quietly, aren't the same thing. But maybe they can coexist, if we let them. He nodded, his hand finding hers. Then we'll make it work. And beneath the stars, with the vines rustling like a soft applause, Clara understood that life like the vineyard demanded patience, courage, and a willingness to bloom even when the shadows were long. The spring sun had barely risen over the rolling hills when Clara noticed the first sign of trouble. A line of dark clouds stretched along the horizon, moving faster than the weather report had predicted. The forecast had promised warmth, gentle rain, nothing to threaten the ripening grapes. She ran her fingers along the leaves, feeling the faint tremor in the vines as though they were whispering a warning. Elias arrived moments later, coffee in hand, but his eyes immediately caught hers. "You feel it too?" he asked. "Yes," she said, tension tightening her chest. "The vines don't lie." By mid-morning, wind gusts rattled the trellises. Workers scurried to tie down loose branches and secure tarps over sensitive plots. Clara moved through them with quiet authority, her voice calm but firm. Yet even as she guided the team, her mind raced. Bordeaux partners were arriving in 2 weeks, the harvest schedule was tight, and a storm of this size could ruin everything. By noon, the sky had darkened into an angry gray. Rain pelted the earth, thick and relentless, turning paths into mud. Clara and Elias stood in the tasting room, watching the vines bend under the storm's fury. "This could destroy the Merlot crop entirely," Elias said, jaw tight. Clara shook her head. "Not if we act." They spent the afternoon outside, working alongside the team despite the cold water soaking through their jackets. Clara's hands were raw, her hair plastered to her face, but she felt alive in a way the boardroom never offered. This was struggle in its purest form, and in struggle, she thrived. Late that evening, after the storm had passed but left the vineyard bruised, Clara reviewed the damage. Sections of the Merlot and Syrah rows were bent or broken. Some fruit had been washed off the vines entirely. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's bad, but not catastrophic. We can recover." Clara's fingers lingered on the crushed leaves. "The Bordeaux investors, they'll see this as failure. They don't care about survival or recovery. They care about perfection." Elias studied her, then smiled softly. "Maybe they need to learn what it takes to create something worth saving." 2 weeks later, the Bordeaux delegation arrived, impeccably dressed, polished, and confident. Clara met them in the tasting room, presenting the storm's aftermath with calm precision. "We've faced a setback," she began, voice steady. "But we've adapted. Medova and Sorel don't rely on luck. We rely on care, strategy, and resilience." The delegation exchanged glances, murmuring. A senior investor stepped forward. The morning after the storm, Medova breathed differently. The vines glistened with raindrops like scattered jewels, and the soil smelled of renewal and rain-soaked promise. But Clara could feel the tension in the air, heavy and insistent. The Bordeaux delegation had left impressed, but their admiration came with an unspoken expectation: growth, expansion, and above all, profit. Clara had seen the gleam in their eyes, and she knew that they valued efficiency over the delicate art of Medova's care. Her phone buzzed. An email from one of the senior investors sat in her inbox, subject line stark, urgent, expansion proposal. Elias stood beside her as she read it aloud, voice steady but quiet. "They want to double the vineyard output by next harvest. Mechanized harvesting. Less hands-on care. Less au sol." Clara pressed her fingers to her temples. "They don't understand the vines. They think control is enough to create excellence. But excellence requires attention, patience, intuition." Elias took her hand. "Then we tell them no." She looked at him, torn. Saying no meant risking the partnership. Saying yes meant compromising the essence of everything she'd built. Days passed in a blur of meetings, tastings, and strategy sessions. Clara walked the vineyard alone at dawn, listening to the wind whispering through the leaves, grounding herself in the rhythm of life that no spreadsheet could replicate. It was then she noticed a subtle but insidious problem. One of the vineyard managers had been secretly meeting with Bordeaux representatives, promising them early access to harvest yields, trying to bypass Clara and Elias entirely. Betrayal, quiet but deadly, had crept into their sanctuary. That evening, she confronted the manager in the dim light of the cellar, the smell of oak barrels heavy around them. "You think you can sell Medova's soul for a bonus?" Clara asked, voice cold, measured. "I'm just trying to secure the company's future," he replied, avoiding her eyes. The future? She echoed, taking a step closer. The future is here. In the hands that tend these vines, the people who care for them every day. Not in the greed of outsiders who don't know what it means to nurture life. He swallowed, but no words came. Clara let the silence fill the space. It was heavier than any argument, sharper than any threat. Later that night, Elias found her on the terrace, staring at the dark horizon where Medova's lights blinked in the distance. They tried to manipulate the board, she said softly. Someone close to us, Elias. Someone we trusted. Elias wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Then we remind them who we are. Together. Clara leaned into him, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into shared resolve. Together, she whispered, the storm of the previous weeks had tested them, shown them the fragility of success. But now, standing on the edge of their vineyard empire, Clara realized that the real challenge wasn't the vines, the investors, or even the storms. It was staying true to themselves when the world demanded compromise. By dawn, they had drafted a plan, independent, uncompromising, and bold. Medova would expand, yes, but on their own terms. Every vineyard worker would remain integral. Every decision rooted in care, not profit. And for anyone trying to bypass them? They would find no cracks in the foundation. Clara walked the rows that morning, sunlight stretching golden across the leaves. She felt the pulse of the vineyard, the quiet strength of what she had built. The legacy wasn't just the vines, the bottles, or the accolades. It was the unwavering refusal to bend to forces that didn't respect the soul of the work. Elias fell into step beside her, hand brushing hers. We're ready, he said. Yes, Clara replied, eyes on the horizon. We're ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile fully, because storms may bend the vine, but they could not break it. Autumn settled over the vineyards like a quiet blessing, the leaves turning shades of amber and gold, rustling softly in the morning wind. Clara stood at the edge of Medova, the smell of ripening grapes thick in the air, the sound of the workers moving through the rows like a heartbeat echoing through the land. The past months had tested them, storms, betrayals, investor pressures, but here they were, standing on the cusp of the harvest that would define the vineyard and their future. Clara felt a pulse of calm beneath the nervous tension, a quiet certainty that no outside force could undo what they had built together. Elias appeared at her side, his coat dusted with morning dew. Ready for the tasting? He asked. Clara nodded, brushing a hand along the vine leaves. Ready to show them what Medova truly stands for. The day of the harvest tasting arrived. Critics, buyers, and media representatives gathered under the grand marquee, the crisp air carrying the scent of crushed grapes and promise. Bordeaux investors were present, seated stiffly at the front row, their polished smiles betraying curiosity mingled with expectation. Clara stepped forward, every eye on her. She felt Elias' hand brush hers, a subtle reminder that she was not alone. Thank you all for joining us, she began, voice steady, resonant. Medova is not built for the quick gain or the highest profit. It is built for care, for patience, for love of the land, and respect for the work we do. The tasting began. Each sip of wine spoke of seasons weathered, of resilience and attention. The crowd murmured, impressed. Bordeaux representatives exchanged glances. One of them leaned forward. Your commitment is extraordinary. But can it scale? Clara met their gaze, unwavering. It can scale on our terms, without sacrificing quality, integrity, or soul. Behind the scenes, Elias managed logistics, but every time he caught Clara's eye, he saw not only the leader of Medova but the woman he loved fiercely, unbowed and brilliant. Hours passed, and the tasting concluded with accolades, orders, and commitments from buyers worldwide. The storm of doubt and pressure that had shadowed the past weeks dissipated, replaced by quiet triumph. Clara and Elias stood together at the center of the marquee, hands clasped, hearts beating in unison. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the vineyards, Clara walked the rows with Elias beside her. The workers had gone home, leaving only the hum of the vineyard and the golden light reflecting off the grapes. I was worried, Elias admitted, voice low, that the pressures, the betrayals, the storms, that they might change us. Clara smiled, brushing a hand along his arm. They tested us, yes. But they didn't break us. We grew stronger because of them. And more importantly, she paused, looking at him with all the quiet intensity of their shared history. We did it together. That evening, as the first stars appeared over the hills, Clara received a message from a young woman named Grace, the same girl who had once struggled to reconcile the past she'd been told to forget. The note was simple. Thank you. I finally understand what it means to build your own life. And to stand in truth. Clara allowed herself a quiet smile, placing the phone down. Some legacies weren't about blood or fortune, they were about courage, integrity, and the choice to rise above the shadows of others. Weeks later, the final shipment of the harvest left Moldova for international markets. Clara watched the trucks roll out, each one a symbol of hard-won triumph. Beside her, Elias held Leo on his shoulders. Look, Mom! Leo exclaimed, pointing at the crates. All our grapes are going to people who'll drink them and enjoy them. Clara laughed softly, her heart full. Yes, buddy. And every bottle carries a little bit of the work, the love, and the truth we put into it. Elias kissed her forehead. We did it, Clara. We really did it. Clara looked over the vineyard, the sun settling into twilight, and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Moldova and Sorel would endure, not because of luck or inheritance, but because of unwavering courage, relentless work, and love that refused to bow to fear or compromise. Some legacies are written in stone. Others are written in soil, sweat, and the heart, and this one, theirs, would bloom for generations. End of story. The price of grace.